tape right now because I'm about to tell you the truth. And F you if you can't handle the truth. This version of Biden is the best Biden ever.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We have special guest with us. Anya Parampil is a Washington, D.C.-based journalist, contributor to The Gray Zone. She's produced and reported several documentaries, including on-the-ground reports from the Korean Peninsula, Palestine, Venezuela, and Honduras. Her recent book, right there, it's Corporate Coup, Venezuela and the End of U.S. Empire, is currently ranked #1 on Amazon in the Venezuelan history category. So congrats on that. Welcome back to the show.
Happy to be here, Jimmy.
So I wanted to play you a few clips, and then I want to get your reaction to it. The first one is Donald Trump said this on the campaign trail this year. I'm pretty sure is when he said this. Let's listen.
Venezuela. How about we're buying oil from Venezuela? When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Anya, but my interpretation of what he just said is the reason why we're putting sanctions on Venezuela and we're undermining their economy is to create instability so that we could take over their country and steal their natural resources the way the economic hitmen in the United States have always done. Is that how you read that?
Absolutely. And it's even come out now in the Washington Post this past week that the Trump administration was warned by Treasury officials and other experts that if they continued with the sanctions package that they unleashed in 2019, that it would inflame a migrant crisis and further destabilize the country. And John Bolton actually went on the record in that article claiming that he thought that was a plus to the regime change gambit because it would put more pressure on the government in Venezuela. So that's pretty cynical, in my opinion, considering that the border and migrants are one of the main campaign issues that Trump has harped on, kind of just blaming it all on Biden. But yeah, Biden did issue temporary protected status for Venezuelan migrants, which attracted them here. But the demolition of Venezuela's economy absolutely occurred under Obama and then Trump. And Bolton himself crafted many of those sanctions packages, actually fought with Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, to get them pushed through. And at the time, openly admitted, yes, we would love to get U.S. companies back in there to exploit Venezuelan oil.
And so when people see, well, I see protesters in Venezuela, they all can't be being paid and things like that. I heard people say and see them on Twitter, and there's a lot of people who oppose. And so what would you agree with that? Well, yeah, that's because the United States has been manufacturing economic pain in that country, so they would foment that unrest, so then they could have a color revolution, so that we could then install a puppet, so then we could then steal their oil. That would be the logical conclusion, correct?
Yes, and this is something that Agatha Damaris, she is an analyst for The Economist intelligence unit, which is an offshoot of The Economist magazine. She actually did a segment or an interview about a year ago or maybe more with Matt Duss, the former foreign policy advisor to Bernie Sanders, in which she admitted all of this. She said, it's tricky because on one hand, the sanctions are designed to make people feel uncomfortable so that they rise up and overthrow their government. But on the other hand, we really don't want people to suffer. So it's like, well, which one is it? Which one is it?
So, and that's, I mean, to me, that's really letting the cat out of the bag. So, I mean, that this is a kind of why they hate Donald Trump, not because it's because he lets you know the actual game that everybody's playing, and that's the actual game that everybody's playing right now in Venezuela. We've been playing that since at least 2002 for the last over 2 decades. Mm-hmm. We've been trying to ever since Chavez decided to keep the oil and keep for his own people, in a sense, the profits of the oil, and give it to his own people. we've been trying to find a way to get rid of that guy or those people who want to do that. It was Chavez and now Maduro. And we want to find a way to put in a puppet like Juan Guaido and exploit it. That's really why they hate Donald Trump, because he just says it, right?
Yeah, he says it. And on the other hand, he also, I think, based on his own instincts, would probably be someone that would sit down and talk to Maduro directly. Those are the sense that I got of Trump based on reading the memoirs of his officials, such as John Bolton and Mike Pompeo. They said that Trump basically viewed Maduro as a tough guy that we all know that is something Trump kind of responds to and respects. And he repeatedly asked to sit down with Maduro and solve these issues directly. Of course, there's the corporate financial deep state that he went along with ultimately with Pompeo and Bolton. But then there's that foreign lobby that we have to worry about, not the Israel lobby in this case necessarily that reigns supreme, but the Cuba, Venezuela expat community in Florida, which basically uses its base there to hold our government hostage and pressure our officials to use our taxpayer dollars. And if Maria Corina Machado, one of the leading opposition figures, had her way, she's called for a U.S. military intervention in Venezuela, they would spill U.S. blood as well to return themselves to power in Venezuela. So that's the issue here, is that these are people who come here and claim that they're Americans wanting to participate in our democracy, but then actually they are mainly interested in trying to return to power back in their homeland, even if that means killing their compatriots and spilling U.S. blood as well. So it's a very cynical game, and that's why the Venezuelan opposition figures in the shadow government recognized by the U.S. had lobbied for so long. They tried to get Trump to issue temporary protected status to Venezuelan migrants. He resisted. Biden did that. But the goal was to bring even more people here so that they could weaponize them against our system and say, look, they're voting now here in Florida or New York and wherever. And now you have to pander to this base that in order to have a voice here is saying we need regime change back home, and I was oppressed. I mean, you're creating an incentive even for people to come here and just to talk about how they were mistreated or make up stories in order to get asylum and status when you're giving them that kind of benefit through the immigration system. Venezuelans who come here are able to work without a green card and are fast-tracked to citizenship thanks to the Biden administration.
And they're here in the first place thanks to the sanctions that was put on by the Donald Trump. So this is really a bipartisan screwing of not only Venezuela, but our immigration policy.
Yeah, it screws the U.S. worker, too, at the end of the day. It seems that no one cares about the American people that are here, and no one cares about the Venezuelans that are at home. It's a nasty policy. And actually, the Venezuelan government has an official policy to repatriate their citizens, because in many cases, thousands of people left and went to Colombia and Peru and Argentina, Chile, and found out, I thought I lived in a socialist hellhole, but it turns out these capitalist paradises in Latin America aren't so great either. And so the Venezuelan government, with the cooperation of those other governments, actually has chartered planes to bring back hundreds, almost thousands of Venezuelan migrants from Latin America back to Venezuela because they actually wanted to go home. And I recently did an interview event with the current Venezuelan foreign minister, Iban Gil, in New York. And he said his government, because the Biden administration refuses to recognize its legitimacy, has been unable to implement a similar program in the United States, which the government would actually like to try to do, give people the opportunity to return. Can you imagine that the Venezuelan government would actually like to give some people the chance to return, and not to mention the fact that they don't have an embassy here. Because of this recognition of a shadow government, there's no functioning Venezuelan consulate. The embassy in DC sits completely empty. So people come here as migrants, and then they don't even have a way to get services from their country to get visas or anything that has to do with going back home. So it's a pretty dark picture at the moment.
So if you're a conservative voter or a voter who votes on the idea of immigration, You should be upset at Donald Trump for what he just said. You should be upset at him for imposing sanctions on Venezuela and destabilizing that country, because that led to somewhere around 7 million Venezuelans leaving Venezuela, and most of them coming to the United States.
Yep. And there's just not a good option, because then on the other hand, you have the Biden administration that openly encourages this migration. Trump maybe does it more subtly by overseeing the controlled demolition of the economy, but still running a hard line on the border. Still people came, but not as much. So it is this symbiotic relationship between the Democrat and Republican Party.
Yes. So I don't want to play you one more. Here's Donald Trump talking about Syria. What was the big goal in Syria?
We're keeping the oil. We have the oil. The oil is secure. We left troops behind only for the oil.
You know, I'm no linguistics expert, but it sounds like he's trying to send us a message here. Yeah. If I could find one word that keeps repeating and coming up, I mean, Donald Trump loves oil more than Hunter Biden at a massage parlor. Am I right? Come on.
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget that he originally selected Rex Tillerson, the former CEO of Exxon, to be his Secretary of State.
Oh, and that's right.
Tillerson was one of the most aggressive when it came to Venezuela, because Exxon had a huge stake in the country before Chavez, and actually battled legally Venezuela's attempt to nationalize its oil reserves throughout the early 2000s. And the individual who litigated that case on behalf of Exxon, Carlos Vecchio, is now the Venezuela's U.S. ambassador, recognized under the shadow regime. So that's why I just call it all a corporate coup, because all of the figures involved in the coup were actually agents of foreign capital and ultimately corporations based in the United States and Europe.
Why do you think Trump gets a pass from his voting base on things like this?
I just think they don't know. I mean, how many people know anything about Venezuela other than it's a communist or socialist dictatorship? I think.
No, can you? When Americans say they're communists, so they all to me when I hear Americans when they say, "Oh, well, Maduro's a communist," they equate communist with being like Hitler, right? But what he really. Is he anything like that? Is he really a dictator? Is he anything like an authoritarian ruler? Or is he just a guy who decided to keep the oil profits for his own people, spend most of it on the poor, and raise them out of poverty? Am I pointing to too rosy of a picture?
No, I mean, that's definitely what the Chavismo and the Bolivarian Revolution, that was the whole point of it, was let's get the IMF out of our domestic policy and get foreign corporations out of our national industry. When it comes to labeling Venezuela communist or socialist, there's something else that Americans might not understand, which is Venezuela is in no way anything like the Soviet Union or even Cuba. It's far more restrained in its brand of socialism. It labels itself socialist, but really only 20-25% of its economy is controlled by the private sector. If you go to Venezuela,
you mean controlled by the government?
Yes.
Okay,
the government. Yeah. So if you go to Venezuela and you're staying in hotels and eating in restaurants and going shopping in stores, everything that you're dealing with is operated by the private sector, the oligarchy. And the government, I guess I meant to say the public sector earlier if I didn't, that they operate 20-25%. And that is what that means is that they own the industry. Like, they don't own everything. They don't control everything in the country. I think they learned the lessons of previous models that there's no way that you can just come in immediately and control every aspect of an economy. And it's actually good to have small businesses and a free market. But they've run into issues then, because when these sanctions came down, some of the oligarchy that was still at war with Chavismo and controlled supermarkets and a lot of the import lines actually began hoarding goods. And there was a period where the government would raid warehouses full of toilet paper and filled with medicine, because the private sector, which again controls the vast majority of the economy, was hoarding goods in order to make the government look bad. And, they came out of that period of mass shortages. But again, the sanctions have remained in place, and it's still, tiring to live under sanctions. So it doesn't surprise me that certain segments of the population might be exhausted at this point. That's the goal. That's the goal of the agenda.
Yeah. So let me play you this. This video has been going around, and they're going to break it down to you. I'm going to let you know I'm here with Anya Parampel, and this video, it's about 5 minutes long. I want to play it for you and get your reaction to it, and you tell me what it got right, what it got wrong from your perspective. But it's basically telling you that the media is almost 100% lying to you about what's happening in Venezuela. And the reason why is because the economic hitmen that want to foment discord through economic pain in Venezuela, so there will be unrest, so they can then install a puppet, so they can then steal their oil, are the same people who run the U.S. media. Okay, so let's watch. This is very interesting.
The media is lying to you about Venezuela. By now, you've probably seen the videos of people in Venezuela protesting, tearing down statues, burning banners of the current president, and blocking Venezuela's main airport. They're protesting because Venezuela just had an election, and the country's electoral authority announced that Nicolas Maduro, the candidate of the United Socialist Party, beat the right-wing opposition candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez. For months, the opposition said they'd only respect the election results if they won. And sure enough, they immediately said the election was fraudulent after they lost. So what's their evidence? The first thing they say is that they've collected 73% of the voting precinct's paper results, and that the paper results don't match the electronic results. For those who don't know, Venezuela's voting system was designed with multiple controls to prevent fraud. There's a two-step voting process. First, where the voter has to produce his or her national ID card and scan their fingerprint to cast an electronic vote. And then the second part, the paper ballot, where the voter receives a paper receipt of their vote, which they drop into a ballot box, creating two tallies which can be checked against one another, one electronic and one paper. The opposing candidates each have witnesses in the precincts for the counting of the paper ballots to check against the electronic tally that gets released by the electoral authority. There were also over 900 election observers from 95 different countries present, and if you look at the reports from Sunday, people were overwhelmingly reporting a calm, orderly process at the voting stations. The opposition is claiming that they already have 3/4 of the paper ballots collected, but they haven't actually produced any of them. So until that happens, it's just talk. Another talking point the media has been running with is this exit poll that allegedly shows Edmundo Gonzalez winning by over 30%. The poll's been cited by the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Reuters, and seemingly shows that the results being reported don't match what voters were saying as they were leaving the polls. The only problem with this? The polling firm they're citing is basically an arm of the U.S. government. As research done by Ben Norton over at the Geopolitical Economy Report shows, the polling firm Edison Research counts among its top clients Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and the Middle East Broadcasting Networks, all of which are U.S. state-owned media that were created to disseminate pro-U.S. messaging in their respective regions. They all work under the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which is a U.S. government agency, and its website says that the media outlets serve, quote, the long-range interests of the United States. Exit polling is also illegal in Venezuela, so they did this outside the law with no way of cross-checking it. U.S. policy towards Venezuela has been incredibly hostile for the last 20 years. So it's hard to believe that a polling firm whose whole business model is based on conducting polls for U.S. state media would suddenly turn out a poll completely contradicting the U.S. narrative. But by far the most telling aspect of all of this is that the Venezuelan opposition said they weren't going to recognize the election results way before the election even started. In a video interview with the Financial Times a month before the election, opposition leader Maria Corina Machado said that they expected to win by a landslide, but that if they didn't, it could only be because Maduro committed fraud. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. Venezuela's electoral authority is supposed to have 72 hours to release the full results, but the opposition decided within 1 hour to declare it illegitimate, and within 12 hours they were staging an insurrection. The U.S. did the same thing too. Almost immediately after votes started being tallied, Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, immediately tried to cast doubt on the election results. This begs the question, how could U.S. officials have known their position on the election before it was even finished? And the answer is, they already had their minds made up. They were going to declare the election fraudulent no matter what. In fact, if the U.S. respected the outcome of this election, it would be the exception to the rule. In 2019, a Venezuelan politician named Juan Guaido claimed he should be the real president of Venezuela after Nicolas Maduro won the election in 2018. Guaido was basically unknown in Venezuelan politics prior to his declaration and wasn't even a candidate in the 2018 election. And yet, despite this, the Trump administration pushed this ridiculous idea that he was actually the president of Venezuela. The U.S. not only met with Guaido like he was the president, they also handed him state assets like Citgo and the Venezuelan embassy, while they funded extreme right-wing opposition groups in Venezuela and openly called for the overthrow of the elected government. In 2002, the Bush administration backed a coup against Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez, who had begun redistributing oil revenue from Venezuela's state-owned oil company from the rich to the poor. U.S. leaders met with the coup plotters, who were handpicked stooges of the Venezuelan elite, and openly endorsed the coup during the brief couple days when the coup mongers had taken power. There's a great documentary about the 2002 coup called The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, which you should all watch. This all begs another question. Why does the U.S. want to overthrow the Venezuelan government? And the simple answer is, Venezuela has the largest petroleum reserves in the world. For the longest time, Venezuela's oil was there for the rich to plunder. The Venezuelan elite and multinational corporations treated Venezuela's oil sector like a personal piggy bank, while the Venezuelan people lived in absolute poverty. This went on until Hugo Chavez, a socialist, won the 1990 election and decided that Venezuela's wealth should be enjoyed by the Venezuelan people, not the elite or foreign corporations. Both the 2002 coup attempt and the 2019 coup attempt were directly tied to oil. In fact, in one interview during the 2019 coup attempt, Donald Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, openly stated that he wanted to see U.S. oil companies take over Venezuela's energy sector.
So if you think of a company like Citgo, which is owned by PDVSA, which is the state-run oil company there in Venezuela, we have a lot of those Citgo assets right here in the U.S. Is that something, for example, sir, that you're looking at?
Yeah, well, we're in conversation with major American companies now that are either in Venezuela or in the case of Citgo here in the United States. It'll make a big difference to the United States economically if we could have American oil companies really invest in and produce the oil capabilities in Venezuela. It'd be good for the people of Venezuela. It'd be good for the people of the United States.
But Hugo Chavez wasn't just a resource nationalist. He was also an anti-imperialist. Part of what he did to change Venezuela was that he decided that Venezuela would no longer be a cog in the U.S.'s imperialist fever dreams in Latin America, that it would advocate for a new international order based on peace and cooperation instead of invasions and economic exploitation. Venezuela became one of the first countries to oppose the U.S. wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and also became an unwavering supporter of the Palestinian cause. Nicolas Maduro, Chavez's successor, has continued this legacy, forging closer ties with global South countries, seeking a new international system, one that's not based on U.S. domination. Venezuela's Bolivarian revolution has inspired other progressive movements throughout Latin America that have undermined U.S. power in the region. Antony Blinken, Marco Rubio, and all the other war criminals that have been managing and overseeing the genocide in Palestine didn't suddenly wake up one day and realize that they care so deeply about the little boys and girls in Venezuela. In fact, the U.S. government is currently enforcing a sanctions regime that's estimated to have killed at least 100,000 people in Venezuela through manufactured poverty and scarcity. U.S. sanctions against Venezuela's oil sector, which is its primary source of income, caused the oil sector to collapse and the subsequent decrease of government income by 99%. So yes, the poverty and scarcity you hear about is very real, but it's caused by U.S. sanctions, which have forced Venezuelans to live off 1% of their pre-sanctions income. This is also what's behind the wave of Venezuelan migration that you hear about on the news. It all comes back to this policy of manufactured poverty. If the United States actually cared about the well-being of Venezuelans, they wouldn't be strangling the Venezuelan economy to the point where there are shortages of fuel and medicine. In fact, the United States tends to be the most violent when it feigns humanitarian concern. They manufacture social crises and then use it as an excuse for regime change. The U.S. has a long history of supporting these color revolutions. When they know they can't directly invade a country, they create a social crisis to undermine it. And now they're doing the same thing to Venezuela. Don't fall for it this time.
So is there? But Americans are falling for it again this time. What do you say? Anything to add to that or correct?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of really great reporting on that polling company because they've just had such a horrible record in Georgia, for example. And I think RT did a really great breakdown of all of the various elections that Edison polling company has meddled in over the last several years. But the issue right now that I think a lot of alternative media are not addressing is the fact that the reason that Venezuela's election system is so great is that it's very easy to audit. That step that they describe in the video, I also go in depth about in my book, where, you know, because they have that. I mean, imagine physical ID, electronic fingerprint scan, physical paper ballot receipt that is automatically used to audit the electronic vote. It's very hard to fudge those numbers. And while the CNE did come out and declare Maduro the winner, they've yet to release the individual local polling site data that would show which localities Maduro and Edmundo Gonzalez won or lost. And so this created a space over the last few days for the opposition to come forward and claim that they have evidence of fraud. And in that video claims they haven't produced evidence. Maria Corina Machado actually has a website up right now where she's posted all of the actos and the polling data that she claims shows there was fraud. The CNE has yet to release that data that would show what exactly happened at those localities. And today, Nicolas Maduro actually announced that he's turning it over to the Supreme Court now, and that all 10 parties that participated in this vote will now have to present their polling data, and the Supreme Court will do an independent audit based on the information it receives from the parties. So it's become a little bit more complicated than in past elections in Venezuela. But honestly, that's why at this point, I don't even want to get into a debate about who won or who didn't, because I know that the US doesn't actually care about democracy in Venezuela. The fact that they've prevented moderate opposition candidates from running, threatened them with sanctions in order to limit the voting choices that Venezuelans had, the fact that we know the US is happy to be allies with the king of Saudi Arabia or the emir of Qatar. This isn't about voting. It's not about how one gets in power. I think a rational US foreign policy would just look at a country and say, who controls the government, who controls the borders, and that's who I'm going to deal with. I'm not really going to get worried about human rights and voting. That's the future of foreign policy, I think. I think the Russians call it strategic partnerships, and that's kind of the Chinese way as well, where you're not getting involved in arguing who won or who didn't. If a government and a military can maintain order and stability in a country, then that's who we're going to deal with. I think getting into the nitty gritty about polling and data at this point, and especially at this stage, while there's no data, is actually giving energy and momentum to the opposition, because you can't win with the back and forth with them.
I couldn't agree with you more. And the point that I've been making since the election in Venezuela is that if you have an opinion on it, the only reason you have that opinion is because you've been fed that opinion by the economic hitmen who have been fomenting social unrest in Venezuela so they can create a color revolution, so they can install a puppet, so then they can steal their oil. That's what this is all about. Why do you give a shit about the integrity of an election in Venezuela when the integrity of the United States elections have been in question? And because there's people protesting, does that mean that the people protesting on January 6th were correct because there were people storming the Capitol? That's the same logic they're using. And the only reason you care is because you've been told to care by the economic hitmen who control our media and defense contractors who are billionaires who run Twitter. That's the only reason you care, is because you've been told to care. We don't live in a goddamn democracy here in the United States. We don't have elections. We have selections, and we've known that. And it's not hyperbole that we live in an oligarchy. Your vote doesn't actually matter, and whatever the rich people want, the rich people get. The handful of billionaires who actually run the things in the West, and even though we don't have a functioning democracy in America, which we don't, I still don't want another country coming in and imposing their idea of democracy on my country. I want Americans to be able to work out our electoral process and figure out, if we don't have a functioning democracy, how to fix it. Just like it's not up to us to figure out what the will of the Venezuelan people are. Exactly what you said before. The people like Anthony Blinken and the oligarchs running America claim to care about the will of the Venezuelan people. That that's bullshit, because they don't care about the will of the people in Saudi Arabia, or the will of the people in Libya, or the will of the people in Africa. They just elected a dictator with 95% of the vote. America supports that. It's got nothing to do with the will of the people. This is exactly the same old story. Economic hitmen that run the United States government want to overthrow that government, no matter who it is, as long as they could get that oil. And that's all this is about. So if you have an opinion about the election being not on the up and up, you don't even have a right to have that opinion, because it's got nothing to fucking do with you, your ass, or the United States. That is an internal problem in Venezuela, and let them work it out. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, let them work it out, and don't get involved, because if we do get involved and we escalate here when there are violent gangs in the street, and let's be clear, the Venezuelan opposition do this every time they lose an election. They don't do January 6th. I say this often, made looked like a Macy's Day Parade compared to what the Venezuelan opposition do, where they go out for weeks and months at a time, build barricades in the street, block off major throughways, and try to strangle trade and the movement of goods and shipping in the country. They burn down public warehouses and doctors' offices and burn people alive in the streets. I mean, they fire guns at National Guard and police troops. Can you imagine if Americans did that? What would happen? We would be in civil war. And that is what people, including MAGA conservatives who claim to care so much about the border, are cheering on right now. They're cheering on a figure, Maria Corina Machado, who is trying to push the country in the direction of a civil conflict. Venezuelans, people don't realize this. I see so many stupid posts online right now, people saying, oh, you can't vote your way out of socialism because they take your guns away. Venezuelans are armed. The Venezuelan Chavista revolution has actually encouraged the formation of citizen militias outside of the government because they want the people to actually be able to defend themselves from foreign intervention. And this happened, you may remember the Bay of Piglets invasion in 2020. Those U.S. mercenaries that came in to capture or kill Maduro were stopped by fishermen, armed fishermen, okay? So that's what we're dealing with when we're dealing with Venezuela. If we throw a match on that, on all of that gas, then it's going to explode, and then it will be our problem. Then it will be our problem because there will be a Syria-style civil war in our hemisphere, right south of the U.S. border, okay? There are people in the Guaido shadow regime who have called for a no-fly zone in Venezuela. Do we know, like, that these are the people that we're dealing with? They want to have a Syria-style war here, and let's not forget, Russia has deep military ties with Venezuela for almost 20 years now since we cut off our own. Venezuela has relied on Russia for military imports. There are now Russian military hardware. There is in Venezuela. There are Russian military advisors, Russian training. They do joint exercises. So if this escalates, what we're really asking for is World War III coming to the U.S. continent. We already have, or to the, I always say that, the American continent. We already have it raging in Europe. We already have it raging in Asia. Why not just light a little match here and have some Russia confrontation with the region in the Americas? I mean, this is totally loco.
And so that's the last point I want to make is that Jackson the Hair Hinkle, has tweeted out that Maduro said the same system that killed John F. Kennedy and attempted to kill Donald Trump is trying to sow civil strife in Venezuela. And again, that's another thing that the people who, for some reason, get their dander up over the election in Venezuela and how you can't vote your way out of communism and all that bullshit. What you're doing is actually propping up the people and the system that killed Kennedy and tried to kill Trump. That's what you're really doing. And he has a short speech. I won't go into it. But would you agree with that assessment? Because I would.
Totally. And, Maduro actually agreed to fight Elon Musk today.
I saw that.
Time and place, because they're willing to put themselves out there like that. And Maduro actually said even after Trump's assassination attempt, which, by the way, there was an assassination attempt on Maduro's life overseen by, Maduro says, John Bolton when Trump was in office.
Yes.
And he still came out and said that political violence is wrong, totally graciously and, with class, I would say, defending Trump there, despite Trump's own attempts to overthrow his government. But Jimmy, I just feel that there's been such an awakening in the United States over the past few years. And I know you feel it too, whether it's what happened through the COVID experience or now with the war in Gaza. I do think people are waking up. Even people that previously felt like they were in these silos left and right and they had to think a certain way. Those are breaking down. And I feel like this is kind of the last step. The Americas, because we've been so heavily propagandized about communism and evil dictators down south and the Cubans and all of that there's still just this large group in the U.S. that, even though they're thinking critically now for the first time on, Ukraine or Gaza even, this is still a blind spot. So I think, your show is playing a very important role breaking through that barrier. And we just have to keep especially pointing out the influence of foreign lobbies and the fact that we're not running a policy towards Venezuela that is America first. I think the more we make those points, the more we can continue to spread this awakening, and people can start to think more rationally when it comes to our neighborhood. Because honestly, I think that's the most important region to understand. Like, forget about Europe and the Middle East. That's far away. Like, we should have a good policy there, but we're going to have to deal with our neighbors first and foremost. And Venezuela has been an ally of ours ever since we were fighting for our own freedom from the British Empire. Venezuelan revolutionaries came and fought alongside us. Francisco Miranda laid siege to King George's troops in Florida before the Venezuelans fought their own war of independence against the Spanish. So I just hope that people start to wake up as to what's going on here, because if a civil war breaks out in Venezuela, it's only going to become a regional war that's actually part of a world war that I don't think we want on our doorstep.
No, certainly the citizenry of the America doesn't want that, but I think actually, well, I know that they do. The people who are the oligarchs and the economic hitmen, as I like to call them, and their mouthpieces are people like Bolton and Trump when he's doing sanctions on places like Venezuela. They do want to. I mean, that's what Trump was basically saying. It's like, oh, the country was just about ready to go over and into a civil war, and we could have went in and got all that oil. That's exactly what they want to have happen, and that is exactly what the unintended consequences of that are horrific for the United States. But again, those people don't care. The rich people who want that, because they feel like they are going to be safe in their bunkers.
Yeah. I mean, just think of the images that we see in Europe because of all the wars that we've had in North Africa and the Middle East, of the boats coming across the Mediterranean. That is what we will have in the United States. It's not going to be just the border. It's going to be absolute destitution and desperation trying to get here because of our policies. So I think we should hit the brakes.
Okay, Anya Parampel. Everybody should check out her book, which is #1 on Amazon in the Venezuelan history category. It's called Corporate Coup, Venezuela and the End of the U.S. Empire. Thanks so much for coming on. It's great to talk to you.
Nice to see you, Jimmy.
Okay. Over, Steph.
All right. Thank you, Anya. Bye.
Bye, Steph.
Hey, so
let's take a break and we'll bring Kurt on.
We're going to take a break and we'll be right back. But I have a quick question before we take a break. Do you want to go to Rumble now, or do you want to do one more story?
Let's do one more story.
Okay. We'll be right back.
His jaw was not moving to the left. His upper neck on the right-hand side was irritated. That's moving great.
Good boy.
That's moving great. Good check. Oh, there we go. Let's see. Let's get another one. Okay. Let's check. Muscle tone's a little better. We're gonna check something real quick. His jaw.
Hey, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there for more AM Joy and the rest of MSNBC. And click on any of the videos right here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. And you can get more videos from MSNBC for free every day with our newsletter. Just visit
Isn't it swell? The memes make themselves. They found a rabbi hole, tunnels and all. There's Jews in the walls. Isn't it bliss? The rabbinical grace soiling the mattresses. Well, let me tell you. If I were Rabbi Shmuley and diddle 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 digga digga diddle diddle dum, all day long I'd diddle little bums. If I were a Shmuley man, I'd peddle all my dildos, dreidel dildos, selling dildos with my daughter and her mum. If I were a Jewish Shmuley man, I'd be digging with a dildo in my bum. I'd wear a grotesque nose and go grab some goyim right on the nipple with a pinch. A Shabbos lap dance brace for the youngest mensch.
At this time, more than any other time, you know, revolution is necessary. It is necessary. Not only based on what has happened with the MOVE organization, you know, the babies that have been murdered, you know, MOVE adults that have been murdered, bombs being dropped on us, but past that to what is happening with all black people, so-called minority people, you know, money poor people. You know, this government, as has been said earlier, has waged war on us. But you know, something about us, particularly here in America, we don't really understand that. You know, we don't really know what war is. You know, for black people, for poor people, that people see as good, that they wasn't forced to do, that they didn't do to try to keep black people appeased, you know, and calm down so that black people wouldn't riot. A prison situation is a crystallized example of that. You can make phone calls in prison. They have movies in prison, but they don't have those things because they just want to be nice to prisoners. They have those things because they know damn well if they don't have, you know, people being able to contact their family, if they don't have, you know, facilities for people to sit there and watch movies, people are going to be frustrated, upset, and they're going to direct that frustration at them prison administrators, and they're going to have riots on their hands. You know, they're going to have people in them prisons turning them prisons out. That's why they have movies. That's why they have access to phones the way they do. And a stop to it when we don't like it, or encouraging it when it's something that's in our interest. You know, we have to call the shots. The people have to take the reins of this system and start dictating, you know, what we need, what needs to be done. And, you know, taking the initiative to do it ourselves. We can't rely on the system. I mean, you know, don't people see what's happening? Every single confrontation that MOVE people have been involved in, every single issue, you know, oppression, economic issues, every single issue facing our people, you know, is something that can be dealt with very, very simply. All people got to do is make their wishes known. All people have to do is stand up and say, listen, we're not accepting that. Unity is the key. Unity is the key to revolution. Revolution ain't nothing to be afraid of. It ain't nothing to shy away from. Revolution, contrary to what officials, you know, this system and those backing the officials running the system, you know, want people to believe that revolution means violence, you know, means blood in the street. I'm saying it can get to that point, but it don't have to be violent. You know, when people come together and take a strong stand on an issue, this government don't have no choice but to listen. Where you think they get their authority from? They don't have no power, but they do have authority to do certain things. Where you think they get it from? They get it from us, from the people. You know, they get it from us accepting the things that they do to be done to stop it. Then you have some people who want to then turn around and say, yeah, well, you know, it's the best we have, and want to make excuses. The time for excuses is over. It's over. You know, every man, woman, and child has to be involved in this revolution. Not only has to be, but is, whether you want to be or not. I mean, our babies gave their lives for this revolution on May 13th. You know, men, women, and children were murdered. And not just move babies, you know. What about all of the young men, women, you know, children 8, 9 years old shot down on the street by cops, you know, by drug pushers? I mean, you know, where do you think that mentality comes from? It comes from this system, from the mentality of this system of getting over, you know, making a quick buck, you know. I'm saying that's where that needs to be done to stop it. Then, you know, what I want people to really, really understand is that it's past time. It is past time for poor people, black people, you know, to realize that this system has failed you. It has failed you. You can't get nothing from it. And what people got to do is withdraw our support from it and start doing for ourselves. That's what we got to do. You know, how long are people going to sit back and beg, you know, this government to do what's right when for hundreds of years all you've gotten is a slap in the face? All you've gotten is this government kicking your ass. That's all. That's all black people have ever gotten from this government.